All right. Good morning. It's Friday, February 12th, 9 a.m., and this is a meeting of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. We're continuing our work on weatherization, and this morning we're getting out into the field and talking with people outside of in the private contractor world to learn more about their work and what they see as opportunities and obstacles as we look to build a program that in the coming years will double and double again the rate at which we're doing energy work on homes and businesses throughout the state. And with that, I'd like to welcome back to the committee Mr. Bradley, President of the Vermont Builders and Remodelers Association, right?
Well, now I'm the immediate past president, so
okay.
It doesn't mean I have any more time in the day, but the title has changed. I'm currently, and thank you for the opportunity, currently I am the legislative chair for the VBRA, but a little bit of the history, which I think is important, because Senator Bray, when you sent me the email, I guess, to our lobbyists, it said, okay, is he a contractor, a weatherization person? Is he this, that, the other? Basically, I could check all those boxes because I've been in the trades and construction field for approximately 30 years, specific to weatherization and high performance building, 16 years of experience. I'm a certified building analyst and energy auditor, also a certified passive house builder, which is building to one of the most efficient extremes that you can in building science being applied. I am the past president for 2019, 2020, the VBRA. As I mentioned, current chair of the legislative committee, also a project manager and developer for Hayward Design Build, owner of Authenticated Building Performance Diagnostics, where I'll go in and do blower door test and check on other people's work at the same time. I am an informed and concerned Vermonter with respect to these topics. And currently, I am the co-host of House Call's Vermont radio show on WDEV on Saturdays, where basically we engage Vermonters on these very topics, on how to build new, how to renovate. What do you ask your contractor? Why is weatherization so important? And what we have been, my colleague and myself, so surprised by is the amount of interest and the great calls that come in while we're on air, but also when we're off air, and the emails that come in. Just there's some really major building science issues out there that people want to know how to do it right, and also what happens when you do it wrong, and how to make sure your contractor is better trained in that. And so that's where I'm going with this a little bit, because it's great to know that there's going to be funding for this weatherization. And I'll just remind everybody that weatherization works all year long. It doesn't just work in the winter time, but it improves, how our houses perform in the summer times. And if our summers continue to get warmer, then there might be more of a need for air conditioning, and we can offset that for sure. But indoor air quality has to come into play. Health and safety have to come into play. You have to look at the durability of what you're putting in. If we throw money at something straight off to make improvements, but those improvements don't last. We looked at a house this last Saturday that came in as a call from an architect on a house. It was $1 million house. It's over in Williston. It was foamed 12 years ago. They thought they were doing the best thing possible, but the foam was causing major mold issues because proper building science was not applied in that situation. And now you've got a $200,000 failure roughly for this whole building. And so when we look at this, we have to make sure that the people who are actually doing the work in this situation are going to be effectively trained. That's why Guy is in this business as well. His Sion, what they do is wonderful when it comes to applying not just how to swing a hammer on the job site, but how to build the science into the building as well. And it's not that one is more important than the other. They are both equally important, because if you're going to build it right, you got to build it to last. And if you're going to make changes to our existing housing stock, that's wonderful, because there's such a need out there. We looked at a house in Jericho a couple Saturdays back. One lady lived there for 90 years, and the house was 130 years old, I believe, never been insulated, ever. And this was the first time it was going to be insulated. So what's the best approach? That means this woman was suffering through these cold winters till the day she died, unfortunately. And she could have used a lot of assistance to make that house more comfortable, more efficient, and use less fossil fuels at the same time. And so with that, when we're looking at this, once again, yes, we want to look at efficiency, but we also have to address health and safety and the durability of what we're making changes to. What I find very important is we can throw money at something, invest money at something more appropriately, but is it going to last, and is it going to yield us quantifiable results on the other side? is I know with the Vermont Legislative Climate Solutions Caucus, I've been speaking with Sarah Copeland Hansas and through our lobbyist, and there's certain climate goals. Well, 2 years ago at the Better Building by Design conference, there was the Dave Keefe got up there and he said, I want everybody to know that it's 2020 now. And in 2020, we met the goals that we set for 2020. Well, actually, we're going to meet them in the next 150 years at current paces. So, I mean, more goals were set, but they weren't being hit. And so if we're going to make these goals, we got to be able to quantify the job that's being done. And is it yielding the results that we want? Otherwise, by 2050, we're going to be in a litigation nightmare with people bringing lawsuits for not meeting certain goals. So how do we get there? Part of this is going to be by having several things that are already in play. Several of these groups like SEON, the Vermont Builders and Remodelers Association, Efficiency Vermont, the BPPA, which is the Building Performance Professionals Association, the Passive House Association in Vermont. All of us have been working together towards a common goal. Part of that is contractor registry, but it's also getting a better workforce out there and in a more robust workforce, better trained workforce, and getting these education opportunities out there. And so if we're going to be putting money towards these certain goals, workforce development is crucial. And part of that, one thing that I was thinking about with this funding, one of the dying arts that we have in this country is the apprenticeship program. I love what you were saying, sir, about the civics lesson. Part of the other was just the OJT in the apprenticeship program that kind of is a dying art anymore, that how are you going to learn the skills from somebody else? But we have a great environment and a great organic grassroots type of situation in the state of Vermont to allow for this to happen. And so one of the things that I would pose to you, everybody in this committee, is if this money can be applied for weatherization in a controlled format to where there's proper ownership, proper oversight, without creating any more bureaucracy, utilizing programs and groups that are already in place, we can really have a robust program that's going to allow for proper checks and balances, proper training, and at the end of it all, yielding the results we were looking for. But on top of that, getting people trained and in great career fields, green collar jobs, which should be a great a goal for people to work for, instead of just oh, you could, if you don't go to college, you can do this, that type of thing. We have to be able to sell to our youth, but also those people who are transitioning from the hospitality industry that took a huge hit this last year and a half. Also the military, where we need to have a program where they can learn a new trade. And if we apply this money to programs like Efficiency Vermont in this fashion, where they use the Act 62 money that they had, about $1.8 million, and we're able to triple the number of projects completed. But let's say they do this. Let's say you have one of their contractors in their network, the EEN contractor base, that is allowed to have a project, receive funding for a client, a low to moderate income individual in the state of Vermont, to effectively make changes in their house, as long as they are hiring individuals who are apprenticing into a field with a valid certification on the other side that will leave them with the trade. They can get more projects completed. More projects will be performing at the level that we want, instead of just somebody going down to the local hardware store or the local big box store, getting more pink stuff, more caulking, more single part foam, and shoving it in place and calling it good. That's not going to yield us the results we're looking for. And the one thing most of you probably know, we do not have an inspection system for building and even our residential building energy standards in the state of Vermont. In a few locations we do, but on the wholesale we don't. If we have a network like this in place, one of the requirements are that you get it verified. You make sure that you're doing the work appropriately. So you have the proper checks and balances. You have, dare I say, enforcement, verification, inspection, but not just that it's done right, but then you're able to go ahead towards the climate goals and improve. Look at the jobs we've gotten done. And this type of stuff is already being tracked and has been for decades with Efficiency Vermont in their program, where they bring a contractor in place, they develop a work scope, say what that work scope is going to be, yield, and estimate the amount of savings at the same time. And so you have this ability to track these jobs and to quantify what work is being done. But at the same time, if we can put the money towards this apprenticeship program, and we already have people in need of employment, we can go ahead and make sure on the other side of this, we're getting a better green collar workforce. And so instead of just saying workforce development, we can actually see this come to pass. It won't be just a buzzword. It'll actually be something that's functional. And, with Efficiency Vermont, I've been a partner with them for 16 years as far as a contractor. And there's been some ups and downs, but overall, it's been really effective. People know who they are. They trust who they are. Sometimes people would say that, well, is this the best way to use things? But they already have programs to help contractors be mentored into the trades. They also have, like I said, like what they've had me do lately is contractors who are out there doing work that are not part of their program. They still want to make sure they get incentives for customers, but they also want to make sure that they're counting the jobs and the jobs are being done correctly. So inspectors like myself or auditors, we go in there before and after, verify the work scope, make sure health and safety is being adhered to, and that the projects are being done appropriately. Then we report the results. So it's not like there's a big heavy lift here that we have to go recreate the wheel. There's something that can be tapped, within the next little bit of time to make this work and actually have a robust training program. They already have training programs. It can be ramped up. And then also you're getting the consumer base out there where there's proper consumer protection of getting the right job done, getting it looked after with another set of eyes so that, you're getting what you're paying for. And I think overall, it can be a really great opportunity for the state of Vermont. This is once in probably a generation type of experience that we have here of all that's happened, and something good can come out of this. Something good can come out of for the new Americans that are in our area that are looking for jobs, and that they can go to a job that is the most glamorous at times, but it is something that's doing a great job for the planet and a great job with our resources and puts this money to work in the right way, and while putting them to work and leaving them with something after it's all said and done, that you can point to and say, yeah, I've got great training now. I've got great understanding of building science, and I can apply this appropriately so the work that we do in the future will be very effective. So I would basically just go back to this once again. I know a lot of ideas have come out, and sometimes I've seen over the last several years that people come up and just say, oh, we got to address workforce development. We've got to address energy efficiency. We've got to address this, that, and the other. And it seems like they're all fragmented. In reality, it can all coalesce at the same time, come together and be very effective. And like I said, it's not reinventing the wheel. So many of these mechanisms and these relationships between the different groups already exist. It's whether or not there's funding and support to allow these things to be carried out appropriately. And I'll entertain any questions at this point in
time. Well, thank you. I'll confess right now that was all music to my ears, and and I think probably everyone on the committees, because we've been discussing this now for about a month, looking piece by piece by piece and looking at how to integrate, make a more comprehensive and integrated program. And so I think we've heard mostly, thus far from folks like Efficiency Vermont and community action groups, but we hadn't heard from the private contractor segment that's out there. And we know that you're a big part of the workforce and also flexible. I think that's the term that's come up over and over again, that as opportunities appear, some of your members can pivot from standard remodeling of kitchens and bathrooms to doing weatherization work when there's the demand for it. So exactly. And one other just quick note by way of reassurance, I don't know if you had a chance to read or hear about the Act 62, the final Act 62 report that we received. Our question to the state was, did we need an all fuels energy efficiency utility? And their answer was no. You actually already have an ecosystem of actors out there, including your members and people in the private contractor world who are delivering these services now. What you need is coordination and most critically, adequate, robust, long-term funding so people can make investments knowing that we're growing a marketplace for a decade or more to come. So the investments will be good ones because the jobs will continue to be there. So.
Definitely. If I may add to that real quick, that was one thing that came out with the Act 62 money is even before the downturn with COVID, many of the contractors were apprehensive about hiring more people and training anybody because they did not know how long that funding would last. And, we wanted to point people, even, Guy was trying to get a better training program going and they started offering courses up here, then everything was shut down. And so just as soon as something wants to get off the ground or there's a little bit of impetus of funding, what you said, sir, was spot on, because where's the long-term security in that I'm going to make that investment and I'll still be able to know that money is going to be there long-term. And we can build a business around that. We can build a greater economy around that if that reassurance is there. So definitely that, because that was echoed by so many of these people, and that's why they're reluctant, these other contractors, moving forward in this direction, because they said, where's this money going to be after 2020, on December 31st? And yeah, that's a great concern, definitely.
Sure. And we also remember, the ARA money came through 12 years ago, whatever. And there was a boom and bust cycle there, which we don't want to repeat.
Sure.
So workforce, we know that that's a critical element of this. It's both a potential challenge, right? Developing that workforce, but it also feels, as you alluded to, as a genuine opportunity for people to move into a growing part of the economy that's going to be active for decades to come. So can you mentioned on-the-job training, apprenticeships. Can you say something about what those opportunities are now and how we might enhance them?
I think that, part of that is going a little bit towards the contractor registry, because, and the reason, and I don't want to divert too much because we're talking about weatherization, but I think this plays directly into the development of the workforce, is with the contractor registry and having a requirement in the contractor registry for education. Because right now the certifications I carry, I have to have at least 30 credit hours over 30 years or 3 years. So every 3 years I have to have another 30 credit hours. Those educational opportunities I invest in through my business, and they're out there in the state of Vermont. So if we had a continuing education credit, some people say, well, that might be too expensive. A lot of these are free. I mean, even the ARBI's training, the Residential Building Energy Standard that ramps up every 3 years, that's a free training offered by Efficiency Vermont. But yet you need to know what those changes are. Otherwise, you're violating code, you're violating the consumer protection concerns, and also you're setting up a lot of litigation. I've been involved in some of those as an expert witness for consumers, and it never ends up well for anybody, no matter who prevails. And so with that, though, to develop that workforce and some of those opportunities that are out there, the contractor registry is part, because if we know who the contractors are out there, we can get these education opportunities emailed out there to them at the same time. And then to develop more of the training programs that are there, I think that if we can tap into like the Better Buildings by Design, which was last week, it's an annual thing. We have Guy with Sion, he has classes all the time, and we can help motivate the people to transition in those directions. One thing, we went to the military a couple years back, and we the general on site, we said, hey, with the Vermont Builders and Remodelers Association, we want to help your guys transition and your gals transition into a new career field. Okay, great. Called us right back. What's your program? Admittedly, we didn't have a great program, but now those programs do exist. Those educational opportunities do exist. And if we had an incentive program out there for the contractors to want to hire more people, so you can take the people from military, like I said, the hospitality industry, women in workforce, some of the Vermont resettlement program, where you have new people coming into the state, offer this as a go-to, and if these contractors are able to hire somebody who's willing to work, willing to be paid really well. I mean, the $15 an hour wage, we don't even think about that right now, because we're well above that. If you're going to get somebody who's qualified and who's willing to do this work, you're paying above that already anyway. And so, like I said, we're checking a lot of these boxes, and some of these we can develop and transition people that are looking for this employment right away if the funding's in place. And those resources already exist, especially through Efficiency Vermont with some of the training. Some of, like I said, the OJT, when I have employees, they come on the job site, I teach them the building science. I work with other contractors, teach them the building science and how to upgrade their game. And that makes everybody smarter and better, but then they can hire people and train them in the same thing. So it's not an if, there's an immediate need. Everybody knows what's going on in the industry right now, where a lot of people are coming to the state, buying sight unseen, just let me have a contract and I'm going to sign it. So the demand for the workforce is there. And the people are looking for the employment. So if we have the funding in place to help employers bring these people on, invest in that training, and take advantage of those opportunities that already exist in the state, a lot of them just go missed because people don't even know they're out there. But if there's that clearinghouse of information where we can point to these different training opportunities, this will take care of itself. And Efficiency Vermont, I signed up with them 16 years ago, took a one-day course and said, geez, I can start building in a way that I don't repeat the same mistakes that everybody else had. And it's going to last and be robust. And so I went full tilt, and I got more and more training, and I knew it was a great investment. And like I said, these opportunities are already there for us to tap into.
Sure. So can you say a little more about it? We are interested in putting more funds into workforce. We know that if we're going to achieve what we're hoping to do out in the housing market, we need the workforce to get us there. So, and that's actually on our, short list to act on sooner rather than later, start building, that pipeline, making a bigger pipeline. Where, if you had the magic wand and you could send the money out, where would you be sending it?
For workforce development, I know that one thing that people always go to is the tech schools. But there's a bigger dynamic at play with the tech schools, because over the last several decades, going into the trades has been, well, like you see other people say, well, at least I can teach if I can't do this, like a second choice. And that's what I've tried to say is, like, the building industry does not need to be your second choice. It needs to be the first choice. And with things changing in building science, you've got to be a lot more on your game, a lot smarter, investing more of your time on a consistent basis to become more skilled at what you're doing. So it's not the same job of 30 years ago. It's definitely, there's a different skill set that's required. And so in applying it just to the tech schools, we have to, one, change the whole perception of what this, trade would be. The green collar job is what I pointed to. Some people just say, I got to go to school, I got to get a big debt, and I got to get the college education. That's the only way. I've had more continuing education credits since I've been out of college, and more, you can count more degrees than I've had while I was in. It's just because as you're continuing to learn. But with that, I think that those transition programs that I spoke to, from the Vermont Refugee Resettlement Program, from the military, from women in workforce, these other fields, there's other labor forces, if we have a transition place to go to, so we can actually say, this is the program, we can tap into those, we can put that money into those places right away and be able to transition this into, this is where you get trained, the work is there. If you are an employer and you hire an apprentice, you get to tap into some of these resources for weatherization that makes your consumers happy. We're helping low to moderate income Vermonters get their buildings weatherized, and at the same time providing that immediate source of training for the individuals. And then along the way, some of this is OJT, a lot of it would be. That's the real application. But you also need the classroom work at the same time, whether it's a Zoom course, which everyone's come to love, and I say that tongue in cheek, or is it something, real world classroom, so you can actually do hands-on in a classroom environment. Something needs to be there, and it's not like it's not like we have to reinvent this. These programs already exist. With Efficiency Vermont, they put something out every month of the different training programs that they have, and you can tap into those, or it's a yearly, Better Buildings by Design. But those programs are there. So if I were to wave the magic wand, I would say, let's go to these groups where people are already looking to be fit into a certain position, new employment, and say, here's the program that you can tap into. But we also have to make the employers ready and aware that if you invest, the money's going to be there long term, and you can offer this greater incentive, and that makes more projects go forward. Like I said, from the Act 62 money, in that, especially after COVID hit, they increased at Efficiency Vermont the number of completed projects threefold. So, and I know Richard Fazie's group, they were hoping to do maybe 12,000 units, weatherized, and in the course of a year, I believe is what he had told me. So you're going to need the people in place, but those people in place, we had such a hard time before COVID, because people were saying, okay, the youth aren't interested, and everyone was looking in that direction. Well, now you've got people who can't rely upon their traditional employment roles. And so I believe that those workers are there, especially the people who are settling into the state. They're going to need something like a viable job. But that does require changing the perception that, being a contractor is the lower rung of employment. Anymore, ask Guy. I mean, you've got to know building science. You've got to understand physics. You've got to understand math in a greater way than just a tape measure. You have to understand these things, and that training is a continual training. And so I think the perception needs to change, even for our guidance counselors, that they need to be able to say that this is a viable opportunity and employment for you and your family, and to be able to change that message at the same time. But you said immediately, I think those groups already exist, that we can offer these employment opportunities to them and start tapping into the workers that are available, for sure, if the funding's there.
So can I just sort of mechanically tick through that list? If you're reaching out to the military, do you have a suggestion there?
With the military, I think that anybody who has been in at all, because, granted, if you had to learn some of the technical components of the military, I was in the military, I was in the Air Force for 4 years, back during the Gulf War, the first one. And, I learned a lot of skill sets. The best thing I took away from the military was how to troubleshoot. And that has turned, that's gone to every other career field that I've been in, has been vital. And so in the military, that's what they teach you how to do. And, go to them and say, listen, if you got people getting out, retiring, transitioning into guard, know that that person's going to be in the guard. So they're going to have a commitment every month and, 2 weeks out of the year. But as an employer, that's going to be there. And so we can go to them and say, listen, wherever your transition office is on base, let them know, here's a program, and you can immediately tap into it.
Okay. One of the other ones we have on that list for transition is to create a pathway for people in the traditional fuel dealer world that so that if they're interested, that they can change their business model and maybe incorporate energy savings, as well as installing more clean heat devices.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just looking. I have plenty of questions on all this, but let me just make sure there's no one in the committee who wants to jump in with one. All right. So you mentioned a unfortunate situation with a house that people did what was maybe regarded as state of the art 12 years ago, and now they're finding all sorts of mold problems in the wall. Was that job correctly implemented at the time it was done, or was it there was an oops there? Like, how do we know that what we're going to be recommending now won't be creating someone else's problem in 12 years?
I love your question, because my colleague Chris West, he's a building science guy as well, and he's the one that's a co-host with me on the radio show as well. We've done energy audits and assessments with buildings. He also is a passive house consultant. He gets into the whole design of things to make sure it's designed appropriately and that it works. He said this, because people have had that same question, but other people have had that objection. I've heard people, listen, our buildings used to be so darn leaky, and we never got sick, and our buildings didn't mold and everything else. Well, a lot has changed since then. A lot of your building materials have changed. And you went from old growth lumber that was more disease resistant to now this new growth lumber that grows within 15 years and then is harvested. And then you get these engineered products that are going to be more susceptible to moisture. And you're putting this all together, and by default, the houses are a lot tighter. And a lot of attention is not being given, the necessary attention is not being given to the indoor air quality and the durability of the structure. And that's why I say to people, with weatherization, you may be calling me about efficiency, but we're going to address first and foremost the tenet of health and safety. Make sure that building is safe, healthy, and you've got indoor air quality that you need, because that affects a lot more down the road with health concerns and everything else if your indoor air quality is not where it needs to be. And you can usually address that pretty readily, but also the durability. And to what you said, you had asked, is the durability. Okay, why are we doing this now when 12 years ago you said to do this, but now you're going to say to do this, and how do we know 12 years from now this isn't going to fail? And what my colleague has said is, make it vapor open. If you allow for drying of your building materials, and you put the proper building science there, and you're not shutting off these drying planes in a house. One of the worst things you can do is go into an old farmhouse with an 8x8 box beam around the stone foundation, foam the inside of it. You just cut off a major drying plane, and you can accelerate rot on the outside. So once again, the proper education needs to be in place, and more importantly, that education opportunity is already there. People just have to go ahead and invest in it at the same time. Put their time there. So if you make a structure vapor open, that means you're allowing the building materials to dry to the outside and dry to the inside. You're not going to trap the moisture in the wall. You're not going to turn OSB, which is the sheeting that people use all the time, that a lot of people in this industry call vertical mulch, because it does disintegrate very quickly. You're not going to turn that into mulch because you've got vapor trapped inside the wall. But as long as the contractor is willing to learn and willing to understand the whole first condensing layer concept, where does this mold happen? Where does the water collect or the ice collect inside the wall? And why shouldn't you use this type of insulation? And even though, if you foam a whole thing, where people think foam is great, well, it can also trap moisture in the wrong way. As long as you understand that and you're staying abreast of that, you're going to avoid those mistakes. So that's how you avoid that, is you first allow the building to dry, and you look at the latest building science. You know what's been properly tested and vetted. There's resources out there. Like I said, Sion is there. Peter Yost is also with Guy. And they do this testing all the time. Also, the Building Science Corp out of Canada with John Straub. He's come to teach here many times. And there are the courses that will allow you to take advantage of that. So as a builder, as a contractor, you're allowed to apply the appropriate building science right up front. And the worst thing you can do is go to some of the old Vermont housing stock, make changes, not consider these things, and end up creating a catastrophic problem if you don't understand building and building science. But you can understand it if you're willing to invest the time and take advantage of the educational opportunities that are already there.
Great. Well, so this is encouraging, and I think we'll stay in touch and talk to you more, because we're going to there's I'd say a clear interest in the committee on really building that pipeline of workforce. And it's one of the things that you had mentioned in your testimony. It gets mentioned, I think, earnestly year after year after year, but I don't know that we've made as much progress as we would like to in terms of building that workforce. It feels a little more hit or miss, like it's a generally accepted thing. Oh, this is a good idea and it's necessary, but we don't seem to be firing on all cylinders yet. And I think that's what we're trying to figure out, how to get them all firing.
And if I can add to that, I'm the poster child, if you will, and I'm not patting myself on the back. I heard about educational opportunities that were being offered in the state of Vermont through Efficiency Vermont, and knew there had to be a better way of doing things. And it's taken time, but I've invested myself, availed myself of those opportunities, and now I am where I am. You know, I'm a successful contractor, weatherization person, building science guy, and we help others avoid these problems. So if it was available to me and I took advantage of it, so can every other person that steps up to the plate to do so as well. Vermont has these resources in place. We just need to be able to expound upon them, and people need to avail themselves of those opportunities. And this can put us in a much better place on the other side.
Right. And I think one of the goals of the program we're developing is to make it affordable for people to step up and take advantage. Senator McCormick.
Thanks. Just briefly, personal anecdote to illustrate what you've been talking about. As a much younger man, I insulated my house, and it took about 3 years for the moldy smells to start, and about 10 years for the roof to deteriorate to the point where when I ripped it out, I was literally able to rip the roof out by hand. It was so rotten. Yeah, I did that to my own house.
And that is why that's so important, because if we're making these changes, and one part that doesn't get brought into the conversation of energy efficiency and climate change and everything else, let's say you're building a house today, but you're doing it in a way where it does fail prematurely, like your siding goes in 10 years instead of lasting 100. The passive house curriculum science basically says you're building a structure to be highly functional at 100 years and keep going, not being the whole old rickety farmhouse out in the field saying, oh, it's been there 140 years and it needs a lot of help. It's more so making sure that what we're doing today isn't going to require us to then invest again into the same resources because they failed prematurely, because that's a greater strain on the environment that people are not even looking at and they're missing right now. So let's build correctly, let's weatherize appropriately, so we're not creating the mold factory, we're not creating the health and safety nightmare, and that we're doing this intelligently and tap into the resources that are available to us to do so.
One thing you were mentioning, and I know this comes up in terms of cost, you know, two builders show up, one says, I'll do this job for 14,000. The other one shows up and they're probably more cut from the cloth you are. And they said, hey, this job is going to cost 18,500. And then the homeowner goes ahead and does the less expensive one for maybe good reasons. You know, who doesn't want to save money?
Sure.
But sometimes people are building to a different standard. So I've heard the concern from builders that if they step up and build to the code, that the marketplace doesn't help the quality of their work get recognized, and it creates sort of an unlevel playing field and a disincentive to doing quote unquote the right thing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I have some really unfortunate examples about that. There's one builder that I know who's successful in this area. I don't want to mention names, but he said he has 50 contracts for homes this year, and he's not going to follow the latest RV standards because he said there's no enforcement, there's no teeth. And yet the latest residential building energy standards, RVs, that went into effect September 1st of this last year, it's not hard to hit those marks. You just have to understand it. And I'm heartened by a lot of these other builders like Bartlett and Weaver, of Bill Fitzgerald, others that are now calling me, another guy that's just Jeff Godbout. He wants to go over the newest changes because he wants to make sure he's hitting those marks and getting there. I do understand that as you get more efficient, it does, and you basically make a home that's going to be more durable. It does sometimes price you out of some people's markets. And you can't get rid of the human condition with respect to that. You can educate and help to offset that. So that people see the value in that. Because a lot of times people see the value in the granite countertops instead of the Formica countertops, and not putting that into building science. But you know, when I got to go to somebody's house, and I've been in thousands of Vermont homes, and I have to sit across the kitchen table from them and say, listen, this is why your house failed prematurely. This is what it's going to cost to make it right. And that's an unfortunate conversation that I never enjoy, but it's the reality that somebody needs to hear on the front end, you know, that when they're first building the home or purchasing the home. And so, yes, that's unfortunate that some builders seem like they're at a disadvantage. The good thing about the weatherization side, and one of the prominent builders in this area spoke to this, he said, you know, as we continue to ramp up and say our new housing stock has to become that much more efficient, they don't really address the existing housing stock as much. So it puts them at a disadvantage. But if more money is going to weatherization of the existing homes, it does level the playing field for everybody. That's what we're trying to do with the contractor registry at the same time, is make sure that if you're doing business in the state, you're getting properly educated, you have the proper insurances, you have a contract for the work you're going to do. And that puts everybody on the same level playing field. And that's important so that you take that argument out of the picture. And when it comes to energy efficiency, yes, there is the passive house. Enrico Bueno, he would say, everyone must build passive today like they do in Europe. I get it. It does last longer, but can people afford it? Or are they even willing to pay for that right now? But code right now, what they say about building to code on anybody's code throughout the nation, they say that's getting a D on basically building a house to the lowest level before you get sued. You know, that's building to code. So most people are going to the high performance tier. But yet there's still the regular builders out there who's saying, I'm just going to this standard and that's it. They're still stuffing fiberglass in the wall. They're putting a vapor barrier behind the sheetrock. They're putting OSB on the outside for sheathing, and they're setting up a vapor problem and rotting prematurely. And that's unfortunate, but it's an education process. And there's enough people in the state of Vermont who are willing to do the right thing. And some don't even realize it yet. I still have those conversations with contractors, and you get the aha moment. A lot of times those conversations are derived from where you've already had a known failure, but then you're trying to show them how to fix it and avoid it the next time. So it's still worth having. That's why we're doing the radio show. We don't get paid for it. We're just trying to get the word out so people know the right questions to ask and look for the right information. And so it takes a lot of us, not just one of us, to be able to change the message on why the trades are not the low rung of employment, that you can make a very good living. It's continuing education, but it's not just education for the builder, it's education for the consumer at the same time, so they know what to ask for of their builders, and not say, well, sacrifice on this and give me this instead. Be able to say, okay, I get why you're telling me I really have to invest more in the roof assembly so that the roof doesn't fail prematurely. You know, it's an education process, but the dialogue has to start somewhere. And we have an opportunity to get this off the ground, I believe, through this program in the apprenticeship side of things and helping educate consumers. If you're a contractor and you're not educating your consumer on what you're doing and why, you're not doing your job. If you're just a salesperson, I think you're doing a disservice, because that person becomes your greatest marketing person on the other side of things once they have success. Once you've made their home comfortable, once you've dealt with the mold issues, once their respiratory issues go away, you know, where they've had health issues, you know, and once their rodents go away, you know, after you've dealt with it, they become your biggest voice, your advocate, saying, this is why you want to do this and make the extra investment. But it takes time, but it takes all of us going in the same direction.
Would you advocate for program participants who are going to be receiving, you know, supports of some sort through this program to have to implement through someone who's registered?
I think that's what we're trying for, yes, because in that registry would have to, and part of the registry would have to be that you're actually receiving the proper education. You know, it's not just enough to say, I've done it for 30 years this way, my dad did it for 30 years this way, or my mom did, and that's the way I'm going to do it. Because building materials have changed. Hitting the nail has not. You know, you still hit the nail the same way, drive the screw the same way, but the materials in which you're fastening that together with, the assemblies, have definitely changed, and you have to be better educated on how those work. So I would, yes, want somebody registered, want somebody trained, like if, let's say you did utilize somebody like Efficiency Vermont, you've got to be part of their program. You've got to sign a code of ethics. You have to go through continuing education. And if there is a problem with the work that you've done, it gets reviewed. And if you don't change your standard, then you're not part of the program anymore. And so that's consumer protection by default. And so I see that as a really good thing as well. So like I said, the mechanisms are in place. We just need to expound upon those and adopt those. And I think we could have a really robust program for sure.
Great. Well, thanks so much for filling us in, and I'd like to invite, and if there are no more questions for Mr. Bradley, Senator West.
I would ask
Senator McDonald.
just how are we going to pay for this? How would you recommend we pay for this?
Well, hearing that the VHFA is going to receive, and I've heard one sum being the same, the 25 million. I've heard it being broken out into 5 million and 20 million as the governor proposed, and 16 and 9 million as others have proposed, and then also private equity coming into to help support that. I believe being able to tap into that, like I said, if there's going to be $16 million going towards moderate to low income for weatherization, part of that component is not just Joe or Jill contractor going down to the store, buying, or even the homeowner, just buying the fiberglass insulation, stuffing it into the hole, calling it good, and then creating a problem. It needs to be backed up with properly educated contractors in this program, like I said before, with the apprenticeships program that can help on that. That's what I would say, sir.
Well, some of us are concerned about one-time money and how it gets used effectively. And thank you very much for.
Any other questions before we talk with Mr. Payne? Okay, so committee, Mr. Payne reached out and talked to me about along the same lines, making sure that when we're doing this work, we do it well, which I think we're all interested in because we want to make a durable investment, and especially given that lots of people don't necessarily have the time and wherewithal to sort through what is the right way to do things, whatever. Can we design a program that by default helps the likelihood that you get quote unquote things done the right way from the first time around? So with that, I'd like to invite Mr. Payne to talk to us about your programs, builder education, and how we create a workforce that does things the right way.
Okay, thank you, Senator Bray. My name, as you can see, is Guy Payne, and I'm the executive director of what's known as the Sustainable Energy Outreach Network. Jim has referred to it as SEON, which simply makes it easy. We came into existence in the aftermath of Hurricane Irene, when the supervisor at SEVCA, which is the community action agency down here in Windham County, came to me and said, we understand energy efficiency, but what we don't understand is water and vapor management. And with that, I knew of Peter Yost that Jim had mentioned, who's probably one of the country's foremost leaders in energy, in high performance buildings. He happens to live right here in Brattleboro. And with that, we started designing programs for builders, architects, other professionals, and sort of related industries in all aspects of building science. And we've been doing that since 2000, and actually first course was run in November of 2011. And we've been meeting, delivering programs since then, as well as offering once a month what we call the Building Science Guild, in which builders get together and noodle on sometimes their case studies, new processes, new technologies. So there's an ongoing way in which our builders meet and discuss the problems that they experience. During that time, and in fact, this Building Science Guild has been meeting since 2012. During that time, though, we realized that the workforce, just as Jim has been saying, is not adequate. And many will say 90% of the people don't know this stuff. And that's a figure that a lot of folks, as much as we say there's great opportunities, we've got a big hurdle. Our workers are woefully unprepared to take on the kind of goal that you have. So we put together a certification program that ties in very basic construction understanding and, hand and power tools, construction documents, safety measures. I mean, your most basic of stuff. And that's what our tech centers do. For those that offer the construction programs. However, there's nothing in the evening for the adult programs, for the adult people that want to get involved and learn this basic stuff. And also you got a question, do day instructors want to take time out in the evening to do the instruction? So one of the issues is we don't have a core of people who are certified to deliver the certification program that is taught at the technical centers. The other problem with that is that given that understanding, kids come away without an understanding of building science. There's nothing in there on insulation. There's nothing in there on water and vapor management. There's nothing in there on thermal bridging. So you have kids coming out without the kind of understanding that is needed. And our builders down here in Windham County said, we don't want to just interview and hire people with that basic understanding. We want them to have the building science, even if it's a level of awareness. So we now have a program. Yep, Senator Campion.
I wonder, can you, and I may have missed this, do you know what that disconnect is between what's happening in the classroom and why certain things aren't happening in the classroom?
Oh, I think it's a matter of time.
Okay.
They're there for just a couple hours a day. And then on top of that, they got to set up and then break it down again. So you've got that problem. And it's a matter of, so what are you going to take out to put in?
Okay.
So you're really struggling there. So what we wound up doing is saying, okay, we believe that to be a basic, it's called the core curriculum. It's from the National Center of Construction Education and Research based in Gainesville, Florida. But we have also said, all right, for entry-level people, they need to have that, as well as we have said our incumbents need to test out of that as a basic core understanding. We've also built in that these entry-level, these high school kids could then take a course called the Basics of High Performance Building, which is one of our advanced courses beyond the very basic construction. And completion of that, that's when our builders had said, we're willing to hire. After a year or so, there is another course called Continuous Control Layers, Air, Heat, and Moisture. And that is a very hands-on course. We don't have the faculty to teach that. We need to have the capability of the career centers or some site where people can go and do this construction work. That's working with series of panels, and we have the instructor overseeing that. The other component of our certification program, so number one, you've got the core curriculum, you've got the basics of high performance buildings, you've got the control layers, and the third part is what Jim was referring to in terms of our apprenticeship program. We have identified key carpentry skills that need to be mastered, need to be evaluated, that is not just of carpentry, not just of wall systems, but the continuous control layers and aspects of building science. So that is the third component or the fourth component of our certification program. It has been endorsed by Vermont Builders and Remodelers. It's been endorsed by Vermont Passive House. The biggest challenge is building that to scale, as well as it is a real challenge given what the cost of a course is. You know, an 8-hour course for us will run around 470 some odd dollars. That's a kick for far too many contractors. So what I've had to do is to write grants to High Meadows Fund, to write grants to Vermont Community Foundation to see if they're willing to subsidize continuing education. We do not have a culture. Jim is unique. You give him an opportunity to learn, he'll jump on it. That's not your typical individual in the state. The culture of continuous learning does not exist. And Jim and I will be the foremost to say, right now, it's no longer optional. Continuous learning must be required. But to do that, we need to have the faculty to do the instruction. Right now, we just have Peter Yost and Steve Sebastian. I'm sure we can transition to Jim and Chris West and some others, but we need to pull together so that our course on basics of high performance building can be taught. Granted, now with COVID, we're able to at least teach one course online. But what was interesting, the one course we weren't up to the Center for Technology of Essex with incentives for people to take the course. Only the choir enrolled. You know, we were not able to reach your person who is building Joe Schmatz, who's building whatever building. And given that, because of COVID, we had to stop. And then from there, the second half, Peter on his own did an online learning piece that required people to take a test. Well, without the certification requirements, only 3 people decided to take the test. So here you got a course that is great, but without the certification, without the incentives, people aren't stepping up to the plate. So I know Senator Bray, you asked the question, how do you start building this thing? On a number of levels, we need to expand the instructional base. We need to have instructors outside of the tech centers who are certified to do the core curriculum of the NCCER. And so it's taught in the career centers or technical centers, just depends what part of the state you're in. We need to have stipends. It is just a frustrating time for me to write grants and then with High Meadows Fund saying, well, you know, we really don't want to subsidize training. That's not, but they were willing to take a risk with us. But that kind of negotiation is just really frustrating from a point who's trying to deliver a course. So we need to build in some kind of stipend. We need to pass the H-157 that requires the registry. And Jim and I would say we want certification in there. It's just voluntary. You know, that was sort of an initial first step, but that's required. And the public needs to understand, what is it, how do you hire a contractor? We can't ask the public to understand building science. That's a leap for them. But they need to understand some of the basic questions of who are your resources? Where's the last training you've been to? What did that include? How do you remain current? You know, those very basic questions that says, I'm with someone who stays on top of what is happening in terms of best practice. We've got another problem, and I know folks at Efficiency Vermont, Jeff Gebhardt, have been struggling with this, but we don't have home appraisers certified in green building assessment. There's nobody south of Route 4 who are green builders not assessors, appraisers. So the notion of how do you value a house that is now engaged in green building, and, you know, it's tough finding the comparables, and there's a resistance to moving forward on that. It's an older population of appraisers. Realtors are the same thing. So people begin seeing that there's value, financial value, in doing the right thing. Not building to code, for some may be an out, but you got to realize you're being illegal. That being the case, you don't want someone like Jim coming in and assessing what's going on, because the first thing he's going to look for is show me the documentation. Banks will have a hard time funding a home that is not built to or renovated to code. Lawyers are becoming much more adept, and homeowners or buyers are becoming much more adept. So those are some of the points I wanted to stress, that Efficiency Vermont is doing a great job offering courses here and there, and, you know, all the organizations do offer programs. What we're doing down here is saying at least what we want the first level of certification to look like. And then from there, we can continue building. And even Efficiency Vermont awards CEUs for our training. So their EEN network, the Efficiency Energy Excellence is what network is what it stands for. There are not enough of these people in the state, but Efficiency Vermont does recognize the work that we are doing both in the training as well as for our Building Science Guild. They do offer CEUs for people who attend the Building Science Guild. So as Jim was saying, there's a patchwork of stuff around the state, but I think we need to look at, so how do we build this to scale?
Okay.
And needing the financial support to support that. You know, what is the infrastructure, and it's not as coordinated as we'd like it to be.
In terms of places, Mr. Payne, that people could go to do the practical hands-on training, do you work with a partner with Habitat for Humanity, for instance? I can imagine they might be, I mean, if you need an actual job site, that would be an opportunity to do the work. And particularly for those folks whose costs they're trying to help control,
Right.
Making an affordable home out of it, they would seem like a good site to be working on. I don't know if that's something that routinely happens, or you've considered it.
No, unfortunately, there's not a Habitat for Humanity organization down in the Brattleboro area. We have worked with one of the representatives for a Habitat for Humanity up in the Rutland area, and really doing a presentation there. But there hasn't been a site here that we could work with to do that. It would be wonderful for us. There's just not a facility here in Brattleboro.
Sure. Is there any possible useful relationship with AmeriCorps? Have you thought about that? Or I don't know
No,
if there's a fit there or not.
we haven't. We run very lean. So sadly, it is me right now. We've had to let go of our program manager. So the ongoing course, it really falls on me to do all the work. And that's why I was saying we need help in the infrastructure to make sure that these courses are delivered.
You know, what might be helpful to the committee is if you said for your area, and you could define your service area, if you could outline what a program would entail, like how many classes offered, how often, to educate how many people, and what an annual budget might be. I don't mean something elaborate, and I want to make sure I'm asking this in sort of, at this moment, a purely academic way, so we'll be informed. But obviously the goal is, if we're going to be funding weatherization, we need to fund the workforce to get us there. And it would be helpful for us to, you could help us understand better. And I make the same invitation to Mr. Bradley as well, and in terms of helping us think about the cost of building a stronger program. I'm glad you both have brought up tech centers. Senator Campion's chair of education. And so I've had the impression for years that they are an underutilized resource. You know, we could do more. And since we have decades of clean energy work to do, it would seem like an attractive career, at least to some people. I'm not sure it's been presented that way yet.
This would also, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Senator Campion.
Thank you. Yeah, the other group that we might want to pull into this, of course, is economic development and Senator Sorokin's team as it relates to you know, their work in the workforce. But I appreciate Senator Bray mentioning education, and it would be great to continue this conversation when Senate Education looks more carefully at CCV, our state colleges, and the tech center, and see if we can be helpful. I think Senator McDonald might have a question.
Senator McDonald, thank you.
This is someone who's had a house insulated and have seen some of the symptoms that I heard this morning. This is the best testimony I have heard on the future of weatherization and its usefulness to the citizens in the state. That if it's going to be done, it ought to be done right. And if it isn't done, if we don't start doing it right, it's going to lose favor. People are going to be resentful, and so it needs to be done right. Thank you very much for the walkthrough and
one of the pieces
explaining
that
the problem.
I wanted to, excuse me.
Explaining the problem clearly.
Yeah. One of the pieces that I think is also important for everyone to know is that when we work with the basics of high performance building, there's equal intensity to energy efficiency and water and vapor management. And one of the things that is not done currently in the weatherization program is to do a broader building assessment form that Peter Yost has designed. There could be others, but it really gives a broader picture of what needs to be done over that includes the whole issue of water management and vapor management. And I think we need to begin examining that both your blower door, infrared cameras, but we need to have a broader assessment of what that home is when Jim starts talking about durability.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have written and underlined water and vapor management, and then air, heat, and moisture. Between that, and that's what I learned today, and it's could be a game changer in the acceptance and the success of and public support. We can't have stories about people. I got my house weatherized and the roof caved in, or the interior, framing rotted, and that it's just crazy. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah.
if I may, because you'd asked this question as well, Senator Bray, is the fact that I think that what Guy is connected with is the fact that there is no real requirement. Yes, we have decided to educate ourselves, but since there's no requirement to do business in this state, to understand our climate better, to understand how our buildings react with the newest products. Once again, I've used this so many times with others, is a lot of the education that most builders get is a salesperson comes to the job and says, use this. Well, what does it do? It has your name on it, like the building wrap. Well, what does it do for the house? Well, it costs less. And so they'll use it, and because it costs less, but they don't understand the building science. So just a basic education requirement of building science, starting at the school level, yes, definitely the tech schools, continuing on, if you're going to be doing business in the state. That's why when we first started looking at the contractor registry, I was a little bit flabbergasted that there wasn't enough support behind requiring the education component. You are putting together a space in which somebody lives in for the majority of their lives, especially now with COVID. And you're going to be inside this house for so long. And if it's not a healthy environment, what are the costs to our healthcare system? Because your indoor air quality, there's our simple little monitors that we use with our radio show. We're allowing people to check them out and just see what are the particulate levels in the house? What are the carbon dioxide and monoxide levels? We're putting those things out there for people to see it. And it's an eye-opening experience. Not everybody in the state's doing that. But that education component has to be there for builders. If you're going to hang a shingle up and say, literally, I'm doing business in the state of Vermont, there has to be some type of requirement for education. Because if you don't understand how the house as a system works, you shouldn't be building that house and that system, because people are living in that house. And that's consumer protection at its most important level, as far as I'm concerned. So we have to have some teeth in this. If we're going to require this, it's not just about passing another law, but not having teeth in it to make sure that there's some type of requirement for builders to understand building science. It's what they're creating. If you have a car built, you're going to want that person who's building that car not just to put it together, but understand how the engine works. You're going to need to know this before you're putting that out to the public. So we really have to give strong consideration there.
Thank you. But you're repeating the lesson that you taught us in your original testimony.
Okay.
By telling us what the problem was and how to solve it. Thank you.
Well, maybe it would be helpful for us to talk about these homes as more like a spaceship, like you're going out and this thing needs to have integrity because you're counting on it. We don't tend to think our homes is that vital to how well we live in them. And, to your point, in the world of voluntary choices, if someone's remodeling and they have the option to do whatever they want currently, but in terms of when we start bringing government money to the table to help promote work and subsidize work and move it, then I think it's not just an option, but an obligation on our side from a fiduciary point of view to know that we're spending those dollars well. And as Senator McDonald rightly points out, what would be an awful thing is for us to ramp up this program and then start having a whole series of problem houses out in the state of Vermont. When people said, well, what kind of program did you create for us that's creating problem houses? So I think your point's really well taken.
If I may just close with this, because this is really important. The court cases I've been involved with where building science has been violated, Arby's was violated. There was no checks and balances until there was a building failure. The company, it was gotten into such a litigious situation where over $200,000 was spent in legal fees on the plaintiff side, and probably just as much on the other side. And 6 years later, they finally prevailed, but they still were bitter about the whole process. If that company that built the home and sold the home just would have aligned themselves with proper building science, or somebody who understood building science, they could do a better, because it was a modular home that was built out of state in our environment, and they placed it here and it started to fail. If they just would have aligned themselves with somebody who understood building science for our area, the whole thing would have gone away. There would have been consumer protection. There would have been a happy customer. And so going forward, my only recommendation would be that, I think, as the gentleman had mentioned, Senator Campion, about having somebody there to speak to education, but to know what that building science is. So what work is going to be done, we apply the right science. And I think you've echoed that, and just, we're available. I know Guy's available. We'll answer any questions you have to make sure this is done appropriately.
Sure.
Senator Bray, I
Yeah,
wanted to get to the question you asked about, so where do you go from here and what's it going to cost? I'm very willing to put together sort of an example, sort of a pro forma of what it would cost, let's say in Wyndham County. I'd be willing to
Okay.
share it with Jim in terms of cost, and then send it up to you to begin getting a handle on what it is that we see this would cost.
Great. That's very helpful. I appreciate your willingness to help, put that together so we can start to put some numbers to this and figure out how do we scale it to statewide. I have one last quick question. Part of, I'm guessing, I'm sure you've mentioned it very briefly. We talk about moisture a lot. Is part of that whole thing that many new buildings aren't designed to manage air changes? Is
Well,
that part?
yes,
this?
because, granted, the code is stipulating that you should have 3 air changes or less. So people are saying by default, because they're seeing problems, you're making the buildings too tight. Make them as tight as you can possibly get them, but ventilate them appropriately. That's why Arby's right now with the stretch code, it requires balanced mechanical ventilation. So you get the indoor air quality that you're looking for. But to say that, well, I'm just going to make my building leakier, so it's going to solve the problem, it doesn't solve the problem, because then you get air infiltration, vapor intrusion from where you don't want it. It's going to be wherever the leaks are possible. That's where the rodents come in too. So the solution is, yes, deal with vapor management, make it as tight as possible, but the balanced ventilation requirement is going to play a lot more to health and safety at the same time. So if you're doing an Act 250 project, or you're in a town where they, like South Burlington, requires the stretch code to be followed, you have to put that in. But everybody else doesn't right now, but the next iteration of the code probably will require that. That being said, some of these buildings by default now are being made tighter, but they're not addressing the indoor air quality the way they should. And so that becomes a big issue with vapor management at the same time.
Great. Well, thanks for the education this morning. I really appreciate you coming in. It's always helpful to us to hear from practitioners out in the field. Helps us do better work for sure. And so, Mr. Bradley, I don't know if you'll have any time to either look at Mr. Payne's pro forma or rough something out on your own, but however it works, we'll look forward to getting something from one or both of you. That'll be helpful. And so, committee, we've gone a little long. Why don't we take a break before we pick back up again and start looking at an outline of the bill we'll put together. And so it is 10:13.